Imagine spending 3 decades chasing a single job, more than 30 years in national politics, 6 presidential bids across both party primaries and general elections, political battles fought through 4 different parties, and not to forget, 8 years serving as Nigeria's vice president. Today, we're examining a political endurance driven by ambition or perhaps desperation. This is a story of Atiku Abubakar, the man who refuses to stop running for Nigerian president. From 1993 to 2023, his pursuit of Nigeria presidency spans 3 decades. Before we go any further in this video, I need to make something very clear. This discussion is strictly analytical. I'm not endorsing or criticizing him as a politician, or neither am I criticizing his political ideology. My goal is very simple. I just want to examine the historical context of Atiku Abubakar political journey. Now I've made myself very clear. Let's begin. Back in 1993, Atiku ran in the Social Democratic Party presidential primaries. After the first ballot, MK Abiola with 3,617 votes won. Babagana Kingibe followed with 3,255 votes. And Atiku placed third with 2,066 votes. At the time, the late General Shehu Musa Yar'Adua, who had the ears of Atiku, advised him to step down to ensure a southern candidate emerged and strengthen party national appeal against the opposing NRC. Atiku agreed, of course, but not unconditionally. He negotiated an agreement with Abiola and his team, believing he would be named Abiola's running mate. And of course, promises were made. But despite the deal, Abiola did not pick Atiku. Instead, he selected Kingibe, the candidate who had come second in the primaries. He went on with a Muslim ticket. The move helped secure Abiola's victory. But for Atiku, it marks a significant personal political loss. However, that strategic decision of stepping down established him early as a national power broker. Perhaps the promise was eventually fulfilled, this time not by Abiola, but by the same political power bloc that had once denied him. As you may know by now, Atiku later served 2 terms as vice president under Olusegun Obasanjo under the platform of PDP. But by 2007 was a very different political battle. The 2007 Nigerian presidential election was defined by an intense power struggle between President Olusegun Obasanjo and his Vice President Atiku Abubakar. The relationship fractured after Atiku opposed Obasanjo's alleged third-term agenda, a controversial attempt to amend the constitution and allow the president to remain in office beyond the 2-term limit. When the proposal failed in 2006, Atiku left the ruling PDP and joined the Action Congress. The Action Congress itself emerged from a merger between the Advanced Congress of Democrats, created largely by Atiku supporters, and a faction of the Alliance for Democracy led by Bola, Ahmed, Tinubu, the current Nigerian president. Atiku faced a quite considerable troubles on the road to the election, from declaring Tinubu the chance to run as his vice presidential candidate, reportedly due to concern over Muslim ticket, to also facing corruption allegations from EFCC, which raised the possibility of his disqualification by the Independent National Electoral Commission. However, in a dramatic turn, the Supreme Court of Nigeria on April 16, 2007 ruled that Atiku could legally contest. This was just days before the election. When the votes were eventually counted, Muhammadu of the PDP won with 24.6 million votes. Muhammadu Buhari followed with 6.6 million votes, and Atiku finished a distant third with 2.6 million votes. The election was itself widely criticized for serious irregularities and lack of credibility. Yet, despite finishing distant third, Atiku remained in the race for Nigeria presidency for another 16 years. He returned to PDP in 2010 after the death of Yar'Adua before the 2011 elections. You see, for me personally, I strongly believe that 2011 was Atiku's best chance of winning the president, if not for the power struggles between or within the PDP. You know, in 2011, the Nigerian election was defined by a bitter power struggle between the North and South in the PDP over the principle of zoning. You know, after the death of President Muhammadu and the eventual emergence of Goodluck Jonathan, the Southern as president, Atiku, in his usual strategic sense, or opportunism if you want, returned to PDP to champion a northern interest group. His argument was that the presidency should return to the North, since he believed that North should complete the tenure of late Yar'Adua. To present a united front against Jonathan, a committee of northern elders selected Atiku as their consensus candidate ahead of other prominent northerners like Ibrahim Babangida. Despite all that, Atiku suffered a heavy defeat in the PDP national convention, losing out to Jonathan. Jonathan secured 78% of the vote, about 2,736 votes, while Atiku received 805 votes. That was a very huge defeat. After the defeat, Atiku allegedly accepted Jonathan's candidacy in the general election on the condition that Jonathan would serve only one full term, a promise that Jonathan's critics later claimed he broke in 2015. As you all know, Atiku opposition to Jonathan eventually led to his exit from PDP in 2013. You may recall when he and the faction of G7 governors walked out of the party convention back in 2010. He eventually joined the All Progressive Congress APC that was formed at the time. So after joining APC, Atiku later became a key contender in the presidential primaries held in December 2014 in Lagos. He finished third with 954 votes. Ahead of him were Muhammadu with 3,430 votes. And we also have Rabiu Kwankwaso with 974 votes. Despite losing, Atiku remained in APC and publicly supported Buhari general election campaign. But by 2017, Atiku complained that he had been sidelined by Buhari-led administration. He claimed he had no relationship with the government and was never consulted on policy matters. I guess a good reason to leave APC at the time. Later that year, he rejoined the PDP to challenge Buhari directly in the 2019 presidential election. So let's talk about the 2019 election. Ahead of the 2019 election, Atiku secured the PDP presidential ticket at the party national convention held in Port Harcourt in 2018. He won with 1,532 votes, far ahead of Aminu Tambuwal, who had 693 votes. And of course, we have Bukola Saraki, who ended up with 317 votes. For me, 2019 was Atiku's most significant alliance in politics. He made a very strategic decision of choosing Peter Obi as his running mate against the interests of some PDP party leaders. At the election, despite a strong campaign, Atiku finished runner-up to Muhammadu Buhari. In that election, Atiku secured about 11.3 million votes, approximately 41% of the votes cast. Buhari won with about 15.2 million votes, roughly 56%. Atiku eventually won 17 states, and including the Federal Capital Territory, performing strongest in Southeast and South-South. The difference between Atiku and the incumbent Buhari was 3.9 million votes. For many analysts, this election marked the peak of Atiku national support, and much of that was attributed to the support he received from Peter Obi's Southeast political base and his youth appeal. However, the political landscape changed dramatically ahead of the 2023 elections. The 2020 election was one of the most Nigerian competitive elections in decades. It was defined by a fragmentation of the traditional two-party system and the emergence of the Labour Party, largely driven by the internal crisis within the PDP. For me, Atiku had no business in contesting after 8 years of Buhari administration. Personally, this is where Atiku should have shown statesmanship. For me, this was a major political mistake on the part of Atiku. His emergence as a northern candidate seeking to succeed President Muhammadu Buhari, who is also from the north, violated the unwritten zoning agreement that power should shift to the south. Anyways, Atiku won as the PDP presidential candidate in May 2022, defeating Nyesom Wike with 371 votes to 237 votes. But before the primaries, his 2019 running mate Peter Obi had already left the party to contest under the platform of PDP. Obi's departure was a major turning point ahead of the election. His obedient movement captured Southeast, South-South, part of the North Central, and even political strongholds like Lagos and the Federal Capital Territory. Atiku himself admitted that Obi took a large chunk of his votes. For me, that was self-delusional because he refused to acknowledge the true impact of Obi in the 2019 election result. So when the final result of the 2023 election came in, Bola Ahmed Tinubu won with about 37% of the votes, which happens to be the lowest we ever experienced in our history. Atiku with 29%, and Obi ended up with 25% of the vote cast. Combined with Atiku and Obi's votes, you will agree with me that they would have easily won that election. However, Because of fragmentation and lack of statesmanship on the part of Atiku, he decided to run for that election and ended up self-sabotaging himself politically. What you have to underscore in Atiku Abubakar political story is that he is more or less a political opportunist. And to be fair to him, that description applies to many Nigerian politicians. Because Nigerian politics is rarely driven by ideology, character, or competence. Political parties are not built around ideas. They are built as a vehicle for capturing power. So if you're expecting Atiku to step down for Obi, you are simply dreaming. You better just wake up from that dream, because that's not going to happen. And of course, if you have been following this video up till now, and if you have been following his political journey up till now, you agree with me that he's a master in winning election primaries. And of course, if he had contested with people like Abiola, battled with Budamasi Babangida, battled with Bola Tinubu in ACN, battled with Obasanjo, and you expect him by now to step down for P2B, just wake up. That's not going to happen. Now let's talk about 2027. The political landscape for 2027 is already taking shape, and it revolves around major opposition realignment, with the ADC emerging as a platform for mega coalition. Rumors of an Atiku Obi joint ticket are everywhere as usual, but Atiku camp has explicitly denied any possibility of him stepping down for Obi, or even for anyone else at all. Which by now, if you have been following this video, you know is not likely to happen. Obi and his supporters are also not willing to back down. The Obedience insists that Obi must be presidential candidate, not a vice presidential nominee. More recently, there also appears to be growing anxiety within the Obi camp, as I've seen in social media. Some supporters fear that an alliance with Atiku could result in Obi being politically sidelined or absorbed by a traditional party structure within the ADC. Meanwhile, Atiku camp continues to emphasize his national reach and political experience as essential to defeating the incumbent All Progressive Congress. Personally, I disagree with that argument, because throughout his career, and as you have seen in this video, Atiku has consistently displayed a pattern of opportunism and political persistence, sometimes bordering on desperation. However, his supporters would argue that he remains a candidate who is institutionally alignable, particularly in the northern part of Nigeria, to win the elections. If that's the case, I think he should have been the president before now. Alright, let me conclude. I think this video has taken longer than I ever imagined. You see, after 30 years, 6 major presidential contests, and roughly 20 million votes accumulated, Atiku Abubakar remains one of the most persistent presidential contenders in modern African history. Whether history interprets his career as extraordinary determination, opportunistic desperation, or unfulfilled ambition, the data reveals a political figure who had shaped nearly every major political realignment in Nigeria. If a single candidate can spend 3 decades forcing political parties to merge, fracture, and reorganize around him, what does that have to say not just about him, but about the structure of Nigerian political system itself? See you in the next video.